If there was blame to be laid, it belonged to the men who signed the treaty. They handed their oldest enemy a bride to seal the peace, and called themselves clever, never asking what she had been before the wedding silk. They did not ask what she hunted. They would find out. The Alpha King would find out first, and closest, and last. For 9 winters, the wolves of Torland had kept a ghost in their forests. It took their raiding parties, one man at a time, always the outrider, always the one who wandered a little past the firelight into the dark. No sound, no struggle. Only a body, found stiff at dawn with a single gray arrow standing up out of it, fletched in feathers no one could name. The soldiers called the ghost, the kestrel, after the little hawk that hangs dead still in the wind before it drops, and they spoke of him the way men speak of weather and old debts, as a thing that simply happened to you if you were careless. They were certain the kestrel was a man, they agreed, because no woman could put a shaft through a man at 200 paces in a crosswind, and because it comforted them to believe it, the kestrel was not a man. The kestrel was a woman named Neve, and on the morning the treaty came due, she was standing very still in a cold stone room, while 3 seamstresses knelt around her and pinned her into the finest gown she had ever worn in her life. She hated it, more than she had ever hated anything. The gown was the color of river ice, and it left her shoulders bare, and it had been built by someone who had never once needed to run. She could not have drawn a bow in it. She could not have knelt behind a fallen log or gone flat in wet bracken. That, she understood, was rather the point. A bride was not meant to do any of those things. A bride was meant to stand where she was put and smile where she was told, and hold a kingdom's peace together with the plain fact of her body. And if the peace broke, she was meant to be the first thing the wolves tore apart. She had killed a great many men from that kingdom. Now she was to marry their king. "Stop scowling," said the man in the doorway. "You will frighten the poor girls." Halloran had trained her since she was 8 years old, since the year the fever took her mother and her father both, and left her small and starving at the edge of the wood. He had found her, setting snares no child should have known how to set, and he had not sent her away. He had put a bow in her hands instead. Everything she was, every trick of breath and patience and stillness, every quiet thing she had ever done in the dark, she owed to the gray old man leaning now against the doorframe, with his arms folded and his eyes soft on her. She loved him, the way you love the one person who ever chose you. "Tell me again why it has to be me," she said. "Because you are the best I ever made," Halloran said. "And because the best is what one sends when everything is at stake." He crossed the room, and the seamstresses melted back from him without being told. He tilted her chin up with one scarred finger, the way he had 1,000 times over 1,000 targets. "Sylvain cannot win another war. You know it better than the council does. You have buried more of our people than they have. This ends it. One wedding, and it ends. And my orders—" His voice dropped so the others would not catch it. "Your orders are to be their queen and keep your eyes open. Nothing more. Yet. The Alpha King is not a safe man, Neve, whatever face he wears for a treaty. Learn him. Learn his house. And should the day come that Sylvain needs the kestrel inside those walls, rather than a bride, you will already be there, and you will already know the shot." It was sensible. It was everything he had ever taught her: patience and position, and the long wait before the loose. She had no reason on earth to feel the small, cold thread of wrongness that pulled through her chest as he said it. It was only that he had said the shot rather than the marriage, and that for one blink his soft eyes had not been soft at all. She would remember that thread later. She would wish she had followed it then. The road north took 11 days. She spent them being taught to be someone else. How a high-born girl held her spoon and her tongue and her fear. How she walked as though she had never once had to walk quietly. Every mile she felt the wood of home thin out behind her, and the bare wolf country open ahead, gray stone and gray sky, and villages that watched the Sylvain banner pass with the flat eyes of people who remembered exactly who had made their widows. She had made a good number of them herself. She kept her chin level and her hands folded, and told herself, as Halloran had taught her, that guilt was only fear that had arrived too late to be useful. "Smile for them," Halloran murmured, stepping back. "You are a shy little cousin of the crown, sent to be loved. No one in Torland has ever heard of the woman who put arrows in their sons. See that it stays that way. An arrow, once it leaves the string, cannot be called back." Nive had built her whole life on that one hard fact. You waited, and you were certain, and only then did you loose, because there was no unspending it once it was gone. She thought she understood the cost of a thing you could not take back. 2 mornings later, the gates of Scarholt opened for her, and the Alpha King came down the steps to meet his bride, and he looked at her once, quickly, the way a hunter looks at a tree line. And Neve, who had never in her life been seen when she did not wish to be, felt the loosed arrow leave the string. The Alpha King of Torland was not what the songs of Sylvain had promised. She had been raised on the shape of him. A butcher in a crown, a wolf who had drowned the border villages and salted the fields, and laughed while he did it. She had carried that picture into battle 9 winters running, and it had steadied her hand every time, because it is a simple thing to kill a monster. The man at the foot of the steps was tall and unhurried, and entirely too awake behind the eyes. He wore no crown at all. He took her cold hand in his warm one, and bowed over it with a courtesy so exact it was almost mockery, and when he straightened he was already smiling, as though the two of them shared a joke that only he had heard. "Lady Neve," he said. "Welcome to the end of the war, your majesty." She lowered her eyes the way a shy girl would. Behind the lowered eyes, she was counting. 2 guards slack at the western door. 1 window unshuttered above the yard with a clean line down into it. The king himself standing open and easy with his weight on his back foot, which was wrong, which was the stance of a man who expected to have to move. "They sent me a quiet one," Ansgar said. "To no one and everyone. How merciful. I was told to expect a lioness. I am only a cousin, Majesty. A small offering." He drew her hand through the bend of his elbow and steered her toward the hall, and she went where she was led, and kept her eyes down and her count running. Archers on the wall, too, both watching the yard and not the gate, which was the wrong way for men guarding a king, and the right way for men guarding against one. A hall full of nobles, who bowed to Ansgar with their mouths, and measured him with their eyes. She had walked into a great many dangerous places in her life. She had never walked into one on the arm of the danger itself, wearing river ice and a smile she did not own. His voice came down soft, and just for her. "That is the part I keep turning over, my lady. A war of 9 years, and to close it, your crown sends me not a princess, not a great lady, but a shy little cousin no one south of the border has ever named." He was still smiling. His eyes were not. "One almost wonders what makes you worth a kingdom's peace." Her heart went very steady, the way it did before a shot. He was not a fool. She had known he would not be, and still the songs had let her hope. "Perhaps I am worth nothing at all," she said, meek as milk. "Perhaps that is the insult, and you are meant to feel it." He laughed then, and it was a real one, startled loose before he could think better of it, and several courtiers flinched at the sound, as if the king laughing were itself a kind of alarm. "Now that," he said, "is very possibly true. You may be the rudest gift I have ever been given." He looked at her again, longer this time, and something moved behind the ease, some sharp and patient thing that recognized another patient thing when it stood next to one. "You will forgive me if I do not turn my back on my wedding present just yet." "Do not answer that," she told herself. A shy cousin would blush and stammer. "Answer it, and he learns you." A wise man never turns his back on anything, Neve heard herself say, low. "Not in a house where the outdoor stairs were washed this morning, and only the second one still shows a dark stain the water would not lift. The smile stopped. For one breath, he simply looked at her, and she felt the whole cost of the sentence land, because a shy cousin did not read a bloodstain off a wet step. She had given him something. After 9 years of leaving no trail, she had left one, on her first morning, to the one man in the world she could least afford to teach. How observant, the Alpha King said quietly, of my delicate bride. And then the great doors of Scarholt closed behind them both, and somewhere above in the gallery a floorboard took a careful, deliberate step, and Neva looked up in time to see nothing at all move back into the dark. They gave her rooms in the West Tower, high and cold, and she noted without meaning to, reachable from the outside by any climber patient enough to trust the ivy. End quote. She lay awake the first night listening to a strange keep breathe and cataloging every way into the room she slept in, which was an old habit and a poor way to rest. In the morning they gave her Odile. I am to dress you, and mind you, and carry your complaints to people who will not listen to them, said the maid, a broad, plain young woman with forearms like a laundress and no fear in her whatsoever. You may as well know I did not ask for the post. Nobody wanted the southern bride. They think you will get us all killed. And what do you think? Neve asked. Odile looked her up and down with frank country shrewdness. I think you hold your knife hand ready when you sleep, she said, which is a strange thing for a shy cousin, and none of my business, and I will thank you not to make it my business. Then she began laying out gowns as though she had said nothing at all, and Neve felt, against every rule Halloran had ever given her, the small warm tug of liking someone. She could not afford to like anyone. She filed it away to be killed later. The keep of Scarholt was a hunter's paradise and a hostage's nightmare, and Neve learned it the only way she knew how, by walking it as though it were a wood. She read the yard for its blind corners, and the kitchens for their second doors. She marked which guards watched her and which watched the king. A boy of perhaps 16 with a guardsman's spear and a face that had not yet learned to hide anything caught her looking and went scarlet and dropped his salute, and an older soldier cuffed him for it. And the boy, Wiston, she heard him named. Through her one mortified glance that told her plainly he had been ordered to keep eyes on her and was terrible at it. They were all watching her. That was to be expected. What was not to be expected was how many of them, when they thought themselves unwatched, kept glancing up at the high gallery and the king's own passages, with the flat, careful faces of people in a house where something is wrong. She found the first sign on the third day. She had gone to the mews because a bride might reasonably like the hawks, and because the mews backed onto the king's private stair and she wished to see it. The falconer was gone to his dinner. She was alone with the hooded birds and the smell of them when she saw the flask left on the sill, small and plain, the kind a man carries against the cold. She had been trained by the best poisoner Sylvain ever produced, because a hunter must know every road into a body. She did not touch the flask. She only leaned close and breathed, and under the sharp bite of spirits, she caught it, faint and green and sweet, the smell of a root that grew in wet ground and stopped a heart as neat as a snuffed candle. Birds were not given brandy. It was meant for a man who came off the cold private stair, wanting a swallow against the chill, and there was only one man that stair belonged to. She stood very still and let the whole shape of it settle over her the way a cold front settles over a valley. Someone inside these walls was killing her husband by inches, patiently. From close, the way she herself would have done it. Which meant her simple orders had just grown a second floor beneath the first. If the Alpha King died before the ink of the piece was dry, there would be no peace, only 9 more winters of it. And this time, Sylvain would not survive the 10th. Whoever wanted him dead wanted her people dead along with him, and did not yet know they had put a hunter in the house. She was still bent over the flask, working out whose hand had carried it up the king's private stair, when a voice spoke from the doorway behind her, close, amused, and far too quiet for a man that size. My lady wife has a great fondness, said the Alpha King, for other people's things. She turned without haste, because haste confesses, and gave him the wide, unguarded eyes of a girl caught where she should not be. Forgive me, Majesty. I only wanted to see the hawks. The hawks are hooded and asleep. Ansgar came into the mews slowly, hands loose and open, and set himself between her and the door, without appearing to move at all. You were looking at a flask, was I? She let a flush climb her throat, which was easy, because she could make herself afraid on command, and fear and shyness wear the same face. I thought it strange, is all. Brandy left standing on a cold sill. She dropped her eyes. My grandmother used to say, a cup left to sit goes bitter, and a bitter cup hides a great many sins. I would not drink anything left standing in a strange house, my lord. That is all a country girl knows. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he crossed to the sill, lifted the flask, and turned it in the light without unstopping it. She watched him understand the warning that had been folded inside the foolishness. She watched him decide not to say so. How fortunate I am, said the Alpha King, in my careful bride. He slipped the flask into his coat as though it were nothing, as though a man found poison on his private stair every morning of the week. Come. They are waiting to marry us, and it is thought poor manners to be late to one's own peace. They married that afternoon in the grey hall of Scarholt, with 200 wolves watching, and not one of them glad. There were no flowers worth the name. A priest of their northern rite bound their wrists with a strip of undyed wool and spoke words about the joining of enemies that sounded, to Neva's ear, a great deal more like a threat than a blessing. She said what she was told to say. She felt the wool tighten. She felt the cold weight of the ring go on. Somewhere south of here were the graves of men who had worn this same gray, and she had filled a fair number of them herself. Now she stood in their hall in a dead color, with their king's wool bound about her wrist, and the strangest part was not the guilt which Halloran had taught her to set down like a pack at the end of a long march. The strangest part was how little the man beside her resembled the thing she had crossed a war to hate. When it came to the last of it, when she hesitated half a breath too long over a vow she did not mean, Ansgar leaned in as though to kiss her brow and spoke against her skin so no one else could hear. An oath is an arrow, my lady, he murmured. We have both just loosed one. Do try to remember that neither of us can call it back. Her heart stopped for the space of a beat. She had thought that thought in her own head 100 times. She had never once heard it come out of another mouth, and certainly never out of his. She lifted her face and smiled for the hall, and only he was close enough to see that the smile did not reach anywhere near her eyes. Among the grey Torlin faces, there was exactly one she knew, and the sight of it steadied her more than she wished to admit. Halloran had ridden north with the delegation of Sylvain, as its envoy and its witness, an old grey huntsman buttoned into a councillor's borrowed finery, he plainly despised. Across the crowded hall he caught her eye, and gave her the smallest nod, the one he used to give her across a clearing when the quarry had not yet felt them near, the one that meant, steady, wait, not yet. It should have settled her. Later she would wonder why it had not. Quite. Later she would remember that all through the vows he had watched the Alpha King, with the flat, patient, measuring look she had only ever seen him wear over a target at the far end of a field. That night he did not come to her rooms, which she had braced for, and which did not happen. Instead, a page brought a folded note in a hard black hand. From tomorrow, you attend me. You will sit at my right, at every table, and stand at my shoulder in every council, and ride at my side when I ride. I find I sleep better with my gifts where I can see them. She read it twice. Then she stood a long while at her cold window, turning it over the way she turned everything over, from every side, looking for the trap in it, because it was a trap, and a clever one. He had put her exactly where any spy of Sylvain would beg to stand, close enough to hear the king's every word, and exactly where she could never once move unwatched, close enough that the king heard her every breath. He had given her everything she wanted, and made it a cage, in the same short sentence. It was, she thought, precisely what she would have done. 2 hunters, under one roof, and only one of them knew it. Standing there in the dark, with his ring cold on her hand, Nev was no longer entirely certain she was the one who knew. Attending a king, it turned out, was a great deal like lying in a hide before dawn. You stayed still. You stayed quiet. You let the world forget you were there, and then you watched it do the things it only did when it fought itself unseen. Scarholt, watched from the king's right hand, was a body, running a low and secret fever. She saw it in a fortnight. The steward who could not meet the king's eye, and could meet his coin box perfectly well. The 2 council lords who fell silent together whenever the war debts were named, and the third who watched those 2, the way a man watches a snake he has decided not to mention. She saw which captains were paid on time, and which were paid late, and how neatly the late ones matched the men who lingered by the king's stair. She had spent 9 winters learning to read a forest for the one broken twig that meant a man had passed. A court was only a forest with better clothes. You are doing it again, Ansgar said, low, beside her at the long table. That thing where your face goes empty and your eyes do all the walking. I am admiring the hall, Majesty. You are counting the exits and pricing my counselors. He did not look at her as he said it. He was smiling down the table at a baron who bored him. It is the most restful thing anyone has done in my company in a year. Tell me what you see. She should have deflected. A cousin deflected. Instead, because he had asked, because some worn-through part of her wanted for once to say the true thing to someone who could hear it, she told him about the cup. Your taster stands too far from you, she said, so quietly, her lips barely moved. He tastes, then he carries the cup, 9 steps to your hand, past 3 people, and any one of those 3 steps is long enough. If a man wished you dead by the cup, he would not touch the cup the taster drinks from. He would touch yours. After. Ansgar was quiet for a moment. And how would you stop him? I would let no hand but one carry that cup from the taster to the king, and I would choose the hand. He turned his head then and looked at her fully, and something passed between them that had nothing shy in it at all. Choose it, he said. The cup is yours. My table is yours. Reorder my whole house if it pleases you, and let my stewards weep. It should not have warmed her. She knew exactly what it was. A test, a leash, a clever man handing a suspected blade, a task to see which way it cut. She knew all of that, and still, when he set his own life into her, keeping across a crowded table as easily as passing the salt, something went through her like the first hot swallow of strong drink on a cold night, and she mistrusted it more deeply than anything else in that gray house. So she took the cup, she took the table, and quietly, hunting alone in the evenings the way she hunted best, she followed the poison back along its trail, one careful step at a time, toward whoever fed it up the king's stair. The trail did not go where she wanted it to go. It did not end among the sullen stewards or the snake-watching lord. It thinned and doubled and went to ground, the way a trail only goes when it is laid by someone very good, and the last clean print of it pointed, impossibly, back toward the guest wing. Toward the quarters set aside for the delegation of Sylvain, toward her own people. She stood in the dark a long time telling herself she had read it wrong. Then she went to bed and did not sleep, and in the morning the king's taster did not come to the hall, because in the night he had been found in his cot, with his face gone gray, and his heart as still as a stopped clock. They said it was his heart. Men that age died of their hearts. Neve stood over the poor gray body, and knew better, because she could smell the wet green root on him even now, and because a man does not reorder a king's cup one day, and lose the king's taster the next by chance. She had moved to close one road to the poison. The poisoner had simply closed a witness on the other. They were watching her hunt. That was the plain and chilling truth of it. She had been in the house 1 month, and already the thing in the walls had felt her circling and struck sideways to warn her off. It did not warn her off. It made her furious, which was more dangerous. The first open attempt came 4 nights later, on the north wall, in the one bad hour before the moon. She was at the king's shoulder, as she was always now, when her ear caught it under the wind, the small wrong sound of a boot finding stone where no boot should be. She had heard that exact sound 100 times from the other side, crouched in the dark, being the thing that made it her body moved before her mind finished the thought. She took a fistful of the Alpha King's collar and hauled him down in sideways as the crossbow bolt came out of the black and passed through the space where he had stood a breath before and struck the parapet in a spray of stone chips. A second bolt was already coming. She had known it would be, because she would have loosed a second, and she pulled him again the other way, and it went wide by the width of a hand. Then the yard was all shouting, and torches and boots, and the two shapes on the far wall were gone over the side into the dark, clean and unhurried. A disciplined retreat by men who had done this work before. Wyston was bellowing for the gate. Guards ran the wrong way. It was chaos, and useless, and she stood in the middle of it with her heart slow and level and her hand still knotted in the king's collar. Ansgar was not shouting. Ansgar was not even breathing hard. He straightened his coat, looked at the fresh white scar the bolt had cut in the parapet, and said, in the mild tone of a man remarking on rain, "The second shot was the interesting one. Whoever pulled me the first time saved my life. Whoever pulled me the second time knew there would be a second." The yard roared on around them. She did not let go of his collar. She could not for a moment make her hand obey. Under her fingers his pulse was going quick and hard. The one part of him that would admit how near a thing it had been. She had put her body between this man and a bolt, without ever once deciding to on plain instinct, the way she would have moved for Halloran, or for no one alive. The songs of Sylvain had left a great many things out of him. They had never mentioned that a monster's heart hammered exactly like a man's. "You are not surprised," she said. "No, someone just tried to put 2 bolts through you, and you are standing there discussing their technique." "Their technique is excellent," Ansgar agreed. "It has been excellent for a year." He turned and looked at her, and all the easy foolishness had gone out of his face, and what was left was tired and hard and terribly awake. "You knew there would be a second bolt. You knew before it came. There is exactly one kind of person who knows that." She should have denied it. She had denied harder truths to harder men, and walked off smiling, while they doubted their own eyes. But her hand was still fisted in his collar, and her blood was still singing, the low old song it always sang after a shot was loosed, and he was looking at her now, the way a man looks, when he has finally turned over the one card that makes the whole ruined hand read true. He let the silence stretch until it had a blade in it. 200 paces, in a crosswind, they always said. "I never once believed it was a man." Let us stop here, just a moment. If this story has its hooks in you, and you would like to be in the room when the next one begins, take a breath and subscribe before you go on. Now, back to it. She did not confirm it. She did not deny it either, because a denial to a man that's certain is only a second confession. She let the silence on the north wall stand between them, and told herself it changed nothing, and she was wrong. And she knew she was wrong even as she thought it. He did not arrest her. That was the thing she could not account for. She had all but stood before the king of Torland with the blood of his soldiers on her name, and he had looked at her as though she were the first true thing he had been handed in years. And then he had bid her good night and gone to bed. A wise king would have hanged her by dawn. She lay awake pricing all the reasons he had not, and did not care for a single answer she found, because every one of them ended with him wanting her alive for a reason she could not yet see. 3 nights on he came for her, after the household slept, and led her down through the dark keep to the old training yard, walled and roofless, and open to the cold stars, and he put a bow into her hands. "No one watches here," Ansgar said. "Show me. I have spent 9 years being told a ghost could do the impossible. I find I would like, just once, to see the impossible with my own eyes. She should have fumbled it. A shy cousin would have fumbled it. But he had brought her a good bow, a beautiful bow, and her hands closed on it the way they had closed on nothing since she crossed the border, and something in her chest that had been held clenched for a month simply let go. She drew. The old wood sang. She loosed into the dark at a straw mark she could barely see, and then, again, and again, faster than a court eye could follow, and every shaft went home in a space the size of a coin. When she lowered the bow, he was not looking at the target at all, he was looking at her, and there was nothing of the mask left on him. "There you are," he said quietly, as though he had been waiting a long time to meet her. "There is the woman they should have sent." And her own wolf, which she had kept on a shorter leash than her aim, which she had held silent and low all her life, the way a hunter holds her breath, chose that exact moment to lift its head and know him. It went through her like cold water and then like fire. Recognition, deep and wordless and utterly unwanted. Her wolf, straining toward the very man her hands had been built to kill. "Mate," it said, with the flat certainty of a loosed arrow. "Mate and mine, and how did you not know?" She had spent her whole life mastering the space between wanting a thing and taking it. It was the one skill beneath all her other skills, the patience that could keep her flat in wet bracken for 6 hours to earn a single clean shot. Her wolf had never once been allowed to overrule that patience. It overruled it now. It did not care that he was the enemy, did not care that she had a quiver's worth of his soldiers to her name, did not care about the treaty or the lie or the long war. It knew him the way the string knows the arrow, and it wanted him with a want that had no manners in it at all, and for one unforgivable moment, she let herself feel exactly how good it would be to stop fighting the whole world and simply belong to something. "No," she whispered to the wolf, to him, to all of it. Ansgar's breath had gone ragged. His eyes had gone gold at the edges. He had felt it too, the same instant from the other side, and she saw the whole impossible thing land on him at once. That his wolf had chosen the kestrel, that the king of Torland was mate to the ghost who had emptied his outriders' saddles for 9 winters running. "That," he said unevenly, "is a very great deal worse than I expected the truth to be." She meant to run from it, and there was nowhere in the whole grey keep to run. He caught her arm before she reached the stair, not hard, and when she turned to tear free, he let her go at once and stood there empty-handed in the starlight, and that undid her more than any grip could have. "I have known since the gate," he said, "not the name, not the how of it, only that my wolf lost its mind the moment your foot touched my ground, and I have spent a month telling it that it had fallen in love with a knife." He laughed, low and without any humor. "It did not listen. Wolves are like that. You married me knowing what I am. I married a mystery my counsel could not read, and my enemy sent me on purpose. I thought, keep her close, learn her, and when the blow comes I will at least see the hand that throws it." He dragged a breath. "I did not plan on the rest of it. On you. No one plans on the rest of it. That is rather the cruelty of the thing." And, because he had said the true thing, she found the true thing coming up out of her before she could stop it. The tiredness she had never once set down, the years of being a weapon that a great many people prized, and not one person had ever simply wanted. He listened. He did not fill the silence, or fix it. When at last she stopped, he told her his own, quiet and plain, the boy crowned at 19 over his father's body, the years of smiling at men who would turn on him for a better offer, the slow certainty this last year that one of them was already killing him by the cup and the stare. And how tired a man could get holding a whole kingdom up by the trick of never letting it see him afraid. He told it the way she had told hers, without asking to be pitied, laying it down between them, like a hunter laying out the day's take. "This is what there is. Make of it what you will." And she understood, listening, that he had never once said any of it aloud before. Not to a counselor, not to a lover. not to a single soul, because there had never been a person in his whole reign he could afford to let see the underside of the crown. He was showing her the soft place under his own ribs. He was handing the kestrel the exact spot to set the knife, on purpose, to prove that he trusted her not to. The bond lay open between them, now unbarred, and through it she felt every word of it land true. It frightened her past bearing, so she did the stupid thing frightened people do. She stepped back and put the cold court voice on, and said it was late, and she was his wife by a treaty, and nothing warmer, and they would both be wiser to remember it. She watched it hit him. She watched him fold it carefully away behind the old easy mask, and say, "Of course, forgive me," in the smooth voice he used on strangers, and she hated herself with a completeness that was almost restful. The peace was to be sworn in 3 days, before a hard, flint-eyed woman named Warden Marna, who had come north from the neutral moot to witness that neither crown cheated the other. The feast to welcome her filled the grey hall with more warmth than it had held in a year. Neve stood at the king's right, as she always did, and watched the cups, as she always did. And that is the only reason Ansgar of Torland did not die between the fish and the meat. She saw the server's thumb go over the rim as he set the cup down. A small thing, the smallest thing. She had the cup off the board and into the rushes before the man had straightened on her feet with a bright, brittle apology about her own clumsiness already spilling out of her. And only Ansgar, and perhaps the sharp old warden 2 seats down, understood that the queen had just knocked her husband's death onto the floor and called it nerves. "Say nothing," Ansgar breathed under the noise. "Not a word. There is a peace to sign in 3 days, and a foreign witness at my own table. If it is cried aloud that the king of Torland is poisoned in his own hall, we will have the war back by morning, and your Sylvain will not outlive it." His hand found her wrist under the cloth. Warm, urgent. "Trust me. 3 days. Let me do this. My way," she said, the word he needed. Then she watched him, later, slip from the hall by the small north door, and she gave him a count of 30, and she followed because she was done trusting anyone in this house to keep him alive, most of all, himself. She found him in the dead taster's cramped room, on his knees, going through the poor man's effects by the light of a single shielded candle, a fistful of papers in his hand. He looked up. For a long, silent moment, neither of them moved. "Neve," he said very carefully, "it is not what you are thinking." "Then tell me what it is," she said, "before I decide for myself." He got up slowly, the papers loose in his hand, and he did not try to close the distance, which was the only reason she stayed in the doorway to listen. "For a year, I have been hunting the hand inside my walls," he said, quietly. "Because the moment I move openly, the hand goes still and waits and tries again when I have stopped looking. Poison up my stair, coin gone sideways out of the war chest, bolts on a wall. All, one hand, patient, close, better than anyone my stewards could name." He paused. "Whoever it is knows my house the way, only a guest is ever allowed to know it. Knew which stair I climb alone, knew the hour the taster's guard changes. Knew, the day you reordered my cup, to stop reaching for the cup and start reaching for the man who tasted from it. That is not a hired blade. That is someone who has studied me, at his leisure, from close, under the roof of my own hospitality." He lifted the fistful of papers. The taster kept accounts he should not have. He was being paid to look the other way at the right moments, and he wrote down who paid him, because a frightened man keeps proof to save his own neck. "I have spent this last hour learning a name I did not want, and I could not simply seize the man who owns it. He came north, under the peace, untouchable, until it is sworn and beloved of every lord in your delegation. Clap the Sylvain envoy in irons, 3 days before the swearing, on a dead servant's ledger, and there is a war by nightfall, and my own council calls it just. A king is not free, the way men think he is. I could move on him, only with proof. No honest man in that hall could argue away. laid before a witness, neither crown could buy. Say it. The coin that paid my poisoner, Ansgar said, and the coin that paid the bolts on the wall, and the coin bleeding out of both our kingdoms to keep this war alive, when both crowns are sick to death of it, all of it moves through one purse. The envoy of Sylvain, the old grey huntsman who came north to witness the peace. He watched her face. Halloran. The name went into her like a splinter of ice, and her whole body rejected it, fast and total. No, Nev, no. You do not know him? He pulled me out of the dirt. He is the one person in my life who never once lied to me. Do you understand? The one. And you will not stand there in a dead man's room and hand me a stranger's ledger and tell me the ground I stand on is not real. She was shaking. She had not shaken on the north wall with 2 bolts in the air, and she was shaking now, in a still room, over paper, because some animal part of her had already done the sum the rest of her refused. Halloran steadying her first draw. Halloran across 100 cold dawns. Patience. Child, the shot comes to the one who waits. Every man who fell had fallen, because a grey voice, she trusted more than her own, had said he deserved to. If that voice had lied, then she had never been a soldier. She had been an arrow, and an arrow does not get to be sorry for where it lands. I know exactly what he is to you, Ansgar said, and his voice was not triumphant. It was almost unbearably gentle, and that was worse. That is why it works. You would never once suspect the hand that raised you. Neither would I, in your place. It is the oldest trick there is, and the best. And he has run it on you, your whole life. My whole life. She heard how thin her own voice had gone. He hesitated. Then, as a man hesitates on the lip of a thing he cannot take back, and then he loosed it. You believe you took up the bow to avenge your people. The villages burned in Torlund colors. The raid the year you were orphaned, that took the rest of your kin and set the fire in you that made you the kestrel. He shook his head slowly. We were never within 40 miles of those villages that season. I have the muster rolls, Neve. My father's own hand. Whoever burned your people and left my banner in the ashes was not mine. He wanted a war, and he wanted a weapon to fight it, and he made both out of one clever fire and one grieving child. He has been aiming you at me since before you were old enough to hold a bow. He named them then, one by one, gently, the way you draw a splinter. The season of the burnings, and where Torlund's banners had truly stood that season, which was nowhere near her people. The name of the man who had first carried word of the raid to the survivors, and given the grief its shape, which was Halloran. The plain fact that the child pulled from the ashes had been trained, not as an orphan is trained, for a safe, dull trade, far from swords, but as a weapon is forged, from 8 years old, by the one man who had appeared at exactly the right moment to find her setting snares in the dark. It was not the accusation of a rival. It was the quiet inventory of a hunter, laying a trail out flat so that another hunter could not help but read it. The floor of the world went out from under her. Because she could not make it wrong. She hunted the thing from every side for its flaw. The way he had trained her to hunt everything, and the flaw would not come. The muster rolls could be checked. The timing had always been strange, if she had ever once let herself look at it, which she had not. Because Halloran had been the one to show her the ashes, Halloran had been the one to give the grief its shape and its target. Halloran across 100 fires saying the wolves of Torlund did this. Remember it, use it. She had carried his war in her own chest for 19 years and called it hers. Why did you not tell me? She said, and she was ashamed of how the words shook. Because you would not have believed me, he said it simply. You would have gone straight to him with it, out of love, and warned the one man I could not afford to warn. I needed you to see it with your own eyes, or not at all. I know what that cost. I am sorry for it. I would do it again. And she wanted to hate him for it, because hating him would have been simpler than the thing she actually felt, which was the slow horror of a person discovering that the floor she had stood on her whole life had been painted onto open air. He had not broken her faith in Halloran. He had only held up a lamp and let her see the crack that had always been there, running the length of everything, from the very first dawn by the very first fire. His answers were always good. That was the unbearable thing in him, and the thing hardest to forgive. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and stood in a dead man's doorway, with her whole self coming apart quietly, and then, because a hunter's body knows how to move even when her heart has stopped, she turned and walked out into the dark corridor. She did not remember the corridor. She left the little room and was suddenly somewhere else in the cold dark, with no memory of the steps between. She whose whole life was the space between steps. 19 years? She had given a false grief, 19 years, and called it a purpose, had knelt over men who had done nothing to her but wear the wrong color, into a war, a liar built, and felt righteous doing it, and even the righteousness had been a gift from the hand that fed her. She got perhaps 20 paces. Nay, the voice came out of the shadow by the stairhead, warm and familiar, and the last voice on earth she wanted to hear, the voice that had taught her everything she knew. Halloran stepped into the thin light, and his kind old face was creased with concern, and his eyes were already reading her the way he had taught her to read a wounded thing. "There you are, child," he said gently. "You look as though you have had a terrible fright. Come, before you go and do something the two of us will both regret." She made her face crumple. It was the hardest shot she had ever taken, and she took it clean, folding all the fury down small and cold the way he himself had taught her, and letting only the grief show. Because grief was what he expected, and a good hunter gives the quarry what it expects. "He knows," she said, letting her voice break. "The king knows what I am, Halloran. He has proof of a hand in the walls." I did not know what to do. Something moved behind the old man's eyes, quick and satisfied, and he took her arm and drew her into an alcove, and lowered his voice to the fond murmur she had trusted her whole life. "Then the time has come sooner than I hoped," he said. "Listen to me. He means to use you. Nev. He will stand up before Warden Marna at the swearing and name you the assassin Sylvain sent, dressed as a bride. And he will break the peace on it, and fall on us with the whole north, while we are shamed and leaderless. I have seen the letters going south." He gripped her arm. "There is one way to save your people now, and it is the way you were always meant to. He will be close tomorrow, closer to you than to any guard. One shot. Child. You have never missed the shot that mattered. Loose it, and Sylvain lives. And after?" She made herself ask, small, the way the girl she had been would have asked. "After, we go home," he said, and stroked her hair as he had when she was small and fevered. "And they will sing you for 100 years, the maid who saved Sylvain. I will see to the song myself." It was the song that gave him away, in the end, as much as the timing did. He had never once in all the years promised her a reward for a kill. He had told her the work was its own reason, that a clean loose needed no more thanks than a sunrise. He was handling her now the way he handled Mark's, with the honey he kept for fools, and the part of her that had loved him grieved even as the hunter in her went cold and still and began, at last, to aim. And there it was, laid out, neat and terrible, and she nearly believed it, because she had believed him about everything for 19 years. That was the terrible gravity of him. Even now, even with Ansgar's muster rolls still cold in her memory, some deep-grooved part of her leaned toward Halloran's certainty, the way a plant leans at a window. He had been her true north so long, that even knowing the needle was bent, her hand still wanted to follow it. She let it show on her face. She let him see the old obedience flicker, because nothing walks a wary creature into the snare like the sense that it has already won. But she had spent those same 19 years learning to read a false trail. And the trail he had just laid had one print wrong in it. "The letters going south," she said softly, as though dazed. "When did they go?" He moves quickly. "Only, I have watched every rider off that gate for a month, she said. And the poison came up his stair before ever I arrived. The bolts on the wall were loosed by men paid a year ago. The rot in that war chest is older than this treaty. She lifted her eyes to his and let him see, for the first time in her life, exactly what was behind them. You cannot have laid all of that to trap a king. You only meant to accuse tomorrow. You laid it because you have wanted him dead for a year, and the peace dead with him, and the war going on, and the coin running through your purse forever. You did not aim me at him this week, Halloran. You have been aiming me at him my whole life. She had watched him teach 100 younger hunters to see exactly this, and never once thought to turn it on him. A trail tells time. Fresh sign and old sign do not lie the way men lie. And every sign in this house, every drop of poison, and every paid bolt, and every crooked coin, was older than the tale he had just told, which meant the tale had been cut to fit a plot long already in the ground. He had not decided this week to save Sylvain by loosing her at a treacherous king. He had built the whole board years back, and only now moved her onto the last square. The kindness fell off his face like a mask off a hook. What was under it was not a monster. It was worse than a monster. It was the same gray, patient huntsman she loved, unchanged, simply turned at last to face her. "You were the finest thing I ever made," he said, and there was real regret in it. "It is a great pity you were always also a fool about the people who feed you." She had wanted, somewhere under everything, for him to deny it. For one clean word that would let her keep even a corner of the man who raised her, he did not give it. He had never wasted a lie where the truth would do more work, and the truth now was that she knew and could not be allowed to walk out of that alcove carrying it. She watched him weigh her life in the half-second it took him to smile. She smiled back. Both of them understood that the lessons were over. The swearing of the peace filled the grey hall the next morning to its cold rafters. Warden Marna sat flint-faced at the head between the two crowns. The lords of Torlund lined one side, and the delegation of Sylvain the other. Halloran, among them in his borrowed finery, watching Neva come to the king's side with the calm of a man who has told his weapon exactly where to point. The hall had been dressed for history. The great treaty lay on a table of pale northern wood between the two crowns, waiting for its final seals, and the neutral warden's clerks stood ready to record whatever was sworn before her, so that no man could later swear otherwise. 9 winters of war had come down to this one cold, bright room, and the words about to be said in it. Neva stood in her place at the king's, right in the river ice gown. They had first dressed her in a bride, a hostage, a guarantee, and under the silk, unseen, she was strung as tight as a full-drawn bow. Ansgar rose to speak the first oath. Neva saw Halloran's hand drift, easy and unhurried, to rest near his belt. She stood before the king could speak. "Warden Marna," she said, and her voice went out across the hall clear and carrying. No shy cousin's murmur in it at all, a voice pitched to reach the last man on a battlefield. "Before any oath is sworn, the neutral moot should know what manner of people swear it. So let me be the first to be honest in this hall." The whole room turned to her. She felt Ansgar go still at her side, felt Halloran's stillness curdle across the floor. "I am no cousin of the Sylvain crown," she said. "For 9 winters the men of Torlund have died in their forests to a hunter they never saw, and named the kestrel, and swore was a man, because it comforted them. I am the kestrel. I was sent into this house wearing wedding silk, to sit at this king's hand, and, when the word came, to kill him." For one heartbeat there was no sound at all, the particular silence of a great many people who have all stopped believing their own ears in the same instant. She found Halloran's face across the hall, and held it while she said the rest, so that he would understand. It was aimed, so that he would know the arrow had turned in the quiver. The hall erupted. Steel came half out of a dozen scabbards. Warden Marna's hand rose, and the flat authority of it froze them all. "And I am telling you," Neve said into the ringing quiet, "that the word came last night, and I will not loose it because the man who gave it has been lying to 2 kingdoms for a decade, to keep them at each other's throats, and the profit running through his own purse. The poison in this king's cup. The gold gone out of both your war chests. Every unhealed year of this war, one hand. Search the quarters of the Sylvain envoy, Warden now, while he stands here and cannot reach them, and see whether you find a peace broker or a paymaster's ledger and a jar of the root that stops a heart." "She is raving," Halloran said, and his voice was pitched exactly for pity, and half the Sylvain lords wanted to believe him. "The strain has broken her. They wanted it badly. It is a fearful thing to learn that the man who has spoken for you for a decade is the rot at your own root, and every lord in that delegation would sooner she be a broken girl than face what it made of them if she was not." She watched the doubt move through them like wind through barley, and knew she had one throw to keep them from closing ranks around him. "Then it will cost you nothing to be searched," said Warden Marna, in a voice like a closing door, and nodded to her own neutral guards, who answered to neither crown. And Neve watched the certainty go out of the old man's face, and what came into it was the thing she had spent a lifetime never being allowed to see, the cornered look of the trapped animal he had taught her to put an arrow through. He did not run. He was too good to run. He came at her instead, low and fast and expert, the little skinning knife out of his sleeve, and going for the soft place under her ribs, a killing stroke, the stroke of the man who had taught her every stroke she knew, which was exactly why it did not land. She turned inside it, the way he had drilled into her 10,000 times on cold mornings, caught the knife wrist, broke his balance over her hip, and put the finest huntsman Sylvain ever made face down on the cold flags of a foreign hall, with his own blades skittering away across the stone. She dropped her knee between his shoulders and leaned down close to his ear so that only he would hear it. "You taught me to read a false trail," she said, "so I would never be fooled by another man's lie. You should have wondered, old man, what would happen the day I finally turned and read yours." For a moment he lay still under her knee, breathing hard against the stone, the great huntsman brought down by the one weapon he had made too well. Then she felt the fight go out of him, not into surrender, but into something colder, the calculation of a man already counting what he might still salvage from a lost field. He had taught her that too. She pressed him harder into the flags, and gave him no room at all to think. Then Marna's guards had him, and it was done. They found it all where she said it would be. The ledger, the jar, letters in 3 hands to men in both kingdoms who profited from a war that would not end. Enough, laid before a neutral witness that not even the proudest Sylvain lord could call it a Torland forgery. The peace was not broken that morning. It was for the first time in 9 winters actually made, because the one man who had spent a decade making certain it never could be was being dragged down to the cold cells under the fort, still to the last, telling anyone who would listen how good she had been. It took days to undo what he had spent a decade weaving. Riders went south with the ledger, so Sylvain's crown would learn what its trusted envoy had truly been. The 2 lords in Ansgar's own council, who had taken the crooked coin, were quietly taken. Both kingdoms' war chests were opened and counted, and a long theft laid bare, and men on both sides of the old border sat with the same sick understanding that their sons had died 9 winters, not for any cause, but to keep one purse full. It should have felt like winning. Mostly, it felt like the silence after a fire goes out, when you see how much of the house is ash. Ansgar had the realm to hold together. There were councils and letters, and a foreign warden to satisfy, and a delegation of shaken Sylvain lords to convince that their own envoy had played them for a decade. He was a king, and he did the work of one, and Neve stood at his right through all of it, because there was no one else who could, and between the 2 of them, in all those long days, lay the one thing neither of them said. Because it had started as use. She had come to kill him, He had married her to watch her. Every warm thing between them had grown up out of the coldest soil two people ever shared, and now that the danger was burned off, the question of what was left stood in every room they entered together, and neither of them would be the first to name it. They were unfailingly courteous. That was how she knew how bad it had become. He asked her judgment on the placement of the border wardens, and she gave it, and he took it, and they stood shoulder to shoulder over maps the way they had once stood over the daily work of keeping him alive, and not once did either of them say the word that mattered. The bond stayed open, because she could not make herself close it, and through it, she felt his care for her, steady as a banked fire, and she told herself that a banked fire was not the same thing as being wanted, and did not believe herself, and could not stop the telling. She decided to leave before he could ask her to. It was the sensible thing. She told herself so while she packed the plain hunting kit she had smuggled north under the wedding silks. The treaty held. Sylvain was safe. The Kestrel had done her last work in Torland, and there was nothing left for the woman inside the legend to stay for. Nothing except a bond she could learn to close again, and a man who had wanted, if she was honest, the same weapon everyone always wanted. She was very good at leaving, it was when you came to it. Only another kind of hunting. The patience to go before the going could be done to you. The discipline to loose the arrow of your own departure clean, and not flinch as it flew. She had left a dozen places this way, and never once looked back at a single one of them. She folded the kit and told herself this would be no different, and the lie of it sat in her chest like a swallowed stone, because there had never before been a place she was forced to lie to herself in order to leave. Odile found her at it, and stood in the doorway with her arms folded, and would not help and would not go, and at last said flatly, "You are the only creature in this whole gray pile that man has ever looked at like she was the window and not the wall. And you are folding a shirt." When Neve did not answer, the maid made a disgusted sound and went out, which was worse than if she had stayed and argued. That was the thought that stopped her hands. Everyone always wanted the weapon. Halloran had wanted the Kestrel. Sylvain had wanted the Kestrel. Even this king, in the beginning, had wanted the deadly thing his enemy sent him, to watch it, and learn it, and blunt it. Not one soul in 19 years had ever once wanted the plain woman who was left when you set the bow down. She had made her peace with that a long time ago. It should not have been able to hurt her still. It could. She could name the moment it had first gone hard in her. She had been perhaps 14, and had made a shot no grown hunter in the camp could make, threading a running deer through a gap in the trees at dusk, and had turned to Halloran desperate to be told, just once, that she herself was the marvel. He had looked at the deer, not at her, and said, "Good, the bow is finding its true hand at last." The bow, not the girl. She had folded that want away that night and grown so good at not feeling its absence that she had believed it gone, until a crownless man in a roofless yard watched the shot land and then, deliberately, turned his eyes to her instead. She was buckling the last strap when the horns sounded from the yard, the note that called the household to the hall, and Odile appeared white-faced in the door to say the king had summoned both realms to the Grey Hall again, all of them, the Sylvain lords and the Torland council and the neutral warden, and that no one knew why. She thought of a dozen reasons on the stair down and did not like any of them. A last council to settle the border. A formal thanks she did not want, performed for the warden's benefit. Some kingly necessity that would need the Queen of Torland to stand at his right one final time and smile while her horse was saddled in the yard. She schooled her face to the smooth court blank she had worn her first day in this hall, and went down to be useful one last time, because being useful was the only way she had ever known how to be near anyone. She went down because she could not keep away. She stood at the back in her plain traveling clothes, a stranger again in the hall where she had knocked her husband's death into the rushes, and she watched the Alpha King of Torland climb the dais, without a scrap of the easy charm he wore like armor, and set his hand on the treaty that lay there waiting for its last seals. 9 days ago, Ansgar said to the assembled hall, I signed a peace that came with a bride, a hostage in a wedding gown. It was the custom, and it was prudent, and it meant that Sylvain could not break faith without her death to answer for it. That was the whole worth of the marriage to the men who arranged it. A woman held in my house as a guarantee. He paused. I am unmaking that clause. Here, before the moot, before both crowns, witnessed. The hall went utterly silent. Nev stopped breathing. The peace between Torland and Sylvain stands on its own from this hour, he said, or it does not stand at all, but it will not stand on a woman kept as a pledge. I will not hold two kingdoms together with a cage. Let the treaty answer for itself. He picked up the pen and struck a line through the marriage clause, slow and deliberate, in front of every lord who had ever counted her as a Torland asset, and Nevid understood with a lurch what she was watching. He was losing his one great advantage. He was setting the kestrel free of him, in front of the very men who would want her leashed, and once it was struck it could not be unstruck. An arrow off the string, no calling it back. A sound went through the Torland lords, low and disbelieving. She saw the sharp faces do the sum she had already done, that their king had just given away the one thing that made the peace safe, the single leash on a beaten enemy, and handed it back for nothing, in front of a neutral witness, who would carry the tale to every court in the north. A wiser king would never have done it. A colder king could not have. She watched Warden Marna's flint eyes move from the struck line to the king's face, and narrow, not in disapproval, but in the manner of a woman revising on the spot everything she had ridden north believing about the Wolf of Torland. Lady Neve of Sylvain is bound to nothing here, Ansgar said. She is free to ride home to her own country tonight, with the peace hole behind her, and no debt on her at all. Then he set the pen down, and came down off the dais, and crossed the whole length of that watching hall to where she stood in her traveling clothes at the very back, and he stopped in front of her, and every particle of the king went out of him, and what was left was only a man. That was the treatise, he said, low, for her, though the whole silent hall could hear every word and he plainly no longer cared. Here is mine. I married a weapon to keep my throne. I will not keep you a single hour on that account, and I have just made sure I cannot. He drew a breath that was not quite steady. So I am loosing another arrow instead, and I am calling this one by its right name. Stay. Not for the peace, which is safe. Not for Sylvain, which is safe. Not because your crown sent you or your master aimed you, or my counsel finds you useful, because none of them do any longer, and I have burned every reason ye might dress it up as. Through the open bond she felt it, unbarred and undefended and terrifyingly plain. No strategy in it anywhere, only a man standing in front of everyone he ruled, with nothing left to hold. I know what was done to you, he said, lower still, so that it was almost only for her, though the silent hall drank every word. I know that every hand which ever reached for you, reached for the weapon, and closed, and called it love, and taught you to expect nothing kinder. I cannot give you back the 19 years. I can refuse, in front of all of these people, to be one more hand that closes. So, I have opened mine. There is nothing in it. That is the whole of what I have to offer you, an empty hand, and everything I am standing behind it. Stay, because I want the woman who puts down the bow. Nev, only her, only you. And if you cannot, then go, and I will still count marrying you the best thing I ever did, and I will not call it back. She had held her aim through riots and ambushes, and the loss of everything she thought was true. She could not hold it now. The tears came, and she let them, in front of both kingdoms, and she thought of every year she had been prized and never once chosen, and here was a king who had just thrown away his crown's whole advantage in the open light to hand her the one thing no one had ever offered, the weapon. A choice. Herself wanted. With the bow set down, "You," she said, and had to stop and start again. "You unmade the one thing keeping your peace safe, on the chance that I would stay, on the certainty that you should be free to go," he said. "The chance that you would stay, I only prayed for." The old wound in her, the one Halloran had dug and salted and used for 19 years. The one that whispered, "No one wants what you are under." The weapon went very quiet because it could find nothing in him to feed on. There was no lie in the bond for it to catch. There was only Ansgar, undefended, having loosed the arrow and standing there in front of the world watching it fly, unable to call it back and not wanting to. She thought of the north wall, and her own hand fisted in his collar before her mind had chosen to save him. She thought of the bond lying open now, with no lie anywhere in it, for her old wound to feed on. She thought, absurdly, of a straw target in a roofless yard and a man who had looked at the shot and then only at her, and said, "There you are," as if she were the thing worth seeing and the impossible feat merely how he had happened to find her. Nobody in her whole life had ever looked past the arrow to the archer. This one did not seem able to look at anything else. "I have never in my life," Nev said unevenly, "been given a thing I did not have to be useful to earn." "I know," he said. "Take it, anyway." She did not answer him there, in front of 2 kingdoms, with the warden's clerks writing down every breath. He had given her a true thing, and a true thing deserved to be answered truly, on her own ground, in her own time, or it was worth nothing at all. She understood that he knew this because he did not press. He only stepped back and inclined his head, and let her keep the choice he had led to give her. And for the first time in a life spent reading the danger in every room she entered, Neve walked out of a hall full of watching eyes, with no plan at all for what she would do next, and found, to her astonishment, that the not knowing did not frighten her. She did not say yes in the grey hall. She was too much herself for that, and he had given her a real choice. And a real choice is a thing you make slowly, on your own ground. Or it is not one at all. So she rode home. She rode back to Sylvain, with the peace hole behind her, and no debt on her at all, exactly as he had promised, and she walked the woods she had grown up in as a free woman, for the first time in 19 years, with no master's war in her chest, and no one's arrow to be. It took her the better part of a season to find out who she was, with all of that set down. A woman, it turned out, only that. It was enough. She had not known it could be enough. She hunted, because it was what her hands knew, but she hunted for the pot now, and for the plain pleasure of the wood, and the difference in it astonished her. No mark, chosen for her by another, no grief to feed. Only the old clean joy of the draw, and the loose hers, private, answering to nothing and no one. Some morning she lay out in the bracken from pure habit, still as she had been trained to be, and watched the light come up gray and gold through the trees, and waited for nothing at all to happen, and nothing did, and it was among the finest things she had ever been given. He wrote her nothing, and sent her nothing, and did not once come south to press her, because he had said it would be her choice, and he was to the bone a man who kept the hard promises. That told her more than any letter could have. A lesser man would have sent a rider, a token, some small tug on the line, to remind her he was there. Ansgar sent silence and held it, week upon week, though she could feel through the bond he never quite closed how much the holding cost him. He kept his empty-handed promise completely, at his own expense, and it worked on her more than any flood of letters could have, because it was proof, repeated every silent day, that he had meant it. She went north again at the first hard frost, on her own horse, in her own plain clothes, with a good bow across her back, that was hers and no kingdom's. The wolves on the wall of Scarholt did not know her. Wystan did, and dropped his spear and grinned like the sun coming up. Odile met her in the yard with her arms folded and her eyes wet, and said only, "Well, took you long enough," and turned away before anyone could see her face. "We kept your place at the wall," Wystan blurted, scarlet to the ears. the king would not let anyone else stand it. He got cuffed by the same old soldier as ever for speaking out of turn, and grinned through it, and Nee felt something settle in her chest that she had spent a whole season learning the name of, which was simply, unremarkably, home. Ansgar came down the steps as he had that first day, unhurried, awake behind the eyes, and halted before her, and did not presume a single thing. "Lady Neve," he said, "you are a long way from home." "No," she said. And she watched that land on him, watched the careful stillness break open into something so glad it was hard to look at, the same undefended thing she had felt through the bond in the hall, out loud now, all over his face for the whole yard to see. They were married again in the spring, and this time no treaty signed it, and no clause held it, and no one on earth had arranged it. She wore no river ice. She wore green, the color of the wood that made her. When it came to the vow, he leaned in to speak against her brow, the way he had the first cold time, in the grey hall full of enemies, and she braced for the old dry joke about arrows and things that could not be unsaid. "I had a clever thing to say about arrows," he murmured. "I find I have lost it entirely. I only want to marry you. Rather badly. In front of everyone." "Then stop talking," said the greatest huntress in the realm, "and do it." And afterward, when it was done and the wood was loud with it, he said against her hair, very low, so that only she would hear, "No taking it back this time. You understand? I loosed this one on purpose." Nev told him. "I have never once missed a shot I meant to take." He laughed, the real one, the one that had startled the whole hall. The first cold day she stood in it, and this time not a soul flinched at the sound of the King of Torland being happy, because they had all had a year to grow used to it. The peace held, that was the plain wonder of it, the thing the songs never dwell on because it makes a poor song. No great battle sealed it. It simply went on holding, season after season, two old enemies learning the slow, unglamorous work of not being enemies. And if the wolves of Torlund and the hunters of Sylvain never quite came to love one another, they stopped burning one another's villages, which their grandchildren would decide, in time, was very nearly the same thing. They still tell it, in the forests of Torland, of the ghost called the Kestrel, who took their raiders one by one from 200 paces in the dark. They tell it a little differently now. Now the ghost is their queen, and she hunts for them, and not against them, and the outriders sleep easier for it, and the children are half sure she is only a story. She lets them think it. A hunter, after all, is at her best when no one is quite certain she is there.